Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. There's no surefire way to accomplish anything in life, but with each conversation, we aim to delve into diverse topics and present fresh perspectives to empower you, our fellow colleague, on your own journey to success. This episode is a special one. Not only are we wrapping up the end of season one, I'm going to be joined by a fellow colleague who boasts a wealth of experience as a seasoned recruiter, having successfully navigated both agency and interim internal recruitment. With a dedicated focus toward data hiring since 2014, they've cultivated one of Berlin's most renowned data meetups and are currently extending their expertise into executive recruitment. This accomplished individual has been instrumental in securing top-tier C-suite talent for some of Europe's most prominent brands, including platforms you may have personally interacted with. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcoming today's guest, founding partner of Peritus Partners, Mark O'Toole. So thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
That was a really weird way to actually try and do that write-up. Try and make the introduction as professional as I could. Look, Mark, obviously we work together, so let's start with the first question that everybody gets. Why are you working in the field of talent acquisition?
Like most people, actually, sort of fell into recruitment really, but soon realised actually it was a bigger vision, long term career that was possible. That then evolved into a very similar path than my previous one, and actually quite enjoyable. You help people, you can build people's careers, and generally a giant competition of survival of the fittest, I think, which was probably the thing that keeps coming back to why I keep doing it.
You're a sucker for putting yourself through pain.
Yeah, sucker for
especially on the agency side.
Yeah.
Look, I think the introduction hopefully gave a brief overview of kind of your focus data for many, many years, and now more recently looking closer into the exec search. I didn't want to allude to too many companies because obviously NDAs and whatnot. But can you just tell me a little bit about the difference between hiring for an exec level person versus hiring for an IC role?
I think the first and most important thing that people need to realise is that the talent pool is a lot smaller. And one thing that I certainly have taken is that you can't essentially fail when you find the right person. And what I mean by that is that there isn't an abundance of CDOs waiting to join your business. So when we do find someone, my philosophy is that we have to make sure that we get them at all costs. So it's a lot more, in my opinion, attention to detail, clear, precise information, although very similar to an IC role. In fact, you're dealing with a lot higher, a lot more experienced individuals who are very analytical in everything you say. So if you mess up and say the wrong thing or give the wrong information from both sides, from my end and from the client's end, typically it doesn't always end well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's not an endless tap. If you look at front end or if you look for a data engineer, you miss somebody, it sucks. Don't get us wrong, but you can always go and find another in some regard. So when the talent pool is smaller, your focus is about finding, ensuring that the process runs as smooth as possible. Everybody's on the same wavelength from the beginning because we have to make the right impression, right?
Yeah, I think first impressions are key. It sets the tone. Majority of the people that you're going to want to hire are not active, and they're just exploring and hearing what you have to say first and foremost. And I think that first impressions and being quite transparent with exec leaders is also important, because they're already thinking how information is shared, how is the chain of command to decisions, what does it look like, and they're already painting quite a big picture from that first 30 minutes, for sure.
That links back to the analytical side, right?
Yeah, probably one thing I have, learnt from actually is that they will overanalyze every component of the position, not just the role, the business, the teams, how they was first presented the position, anything from real small details to people being on time for interviews. Generally speaking, if they hear any negative about a company, they would probably want to know why, and I think that's where a lot of time and detail has to go in to make sure they have every piece of the pie covered before they make any decision on a potential move.
So why do you think it's actually important? So say I'm an internal talent team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it's important for me to know how I should be approaching a more senior exec level versus a standard IC role?
This might go against the grain really, that you would typically hear, but talent funnels, in my opinion, at exec level mean nothing. You could have 30 leaders in your funnel. It doesn't mean anything, because to find the person you want at that level, typically you might find one or two very, very interesting, and you might offer one person. But having said that, that person has to take your position, otherwise you're back to square one. And to go and find another 30 for your talent funnel is not that easy. And for me, it's not about quantity; it's about quality and actually finding the right person, rather than just having a constant flow of new candidates. In my opinion, it doesn't work that way.
I think a lot of people who are going to listen to this will probably have the same mindset, at least verbally, to say quality over quantity. And the reason I say
Mm-hmm.
verbally is that when it gets down to it, and you're presented with the search of a CDO, a CTO, a CISO, or whatever, right? Automatically you fall back into, okay, how do I normally search? What do I normally do in this process? Or you work for a company maybe who already has a process, right? Because they have created standardization across everything, and it's another role that's come into you, and it's a standardized process. But what I'm hearing is you don't believe that to be the case. When it gets to these levels, it's it's different. You have to have a different approach, right?
Although it has the same fundamentals as a IC position, I think exec level positions are definitely all about the attention to detail. And for example, job specs are somewhat irrelevant, because the job spec, in my opinion, only tells a candidate or a leader what the great things are about a business, but exec leaders don't care what the great things are. Essentially, at the start they do, but when you get into the process, they want to know the good, bad, and the ugly, what the challenges are, what the communication's like, what they should be looking out for. Is their boss going to be hard work? These details are key. Technologies, goes out the window. It's a nice to have, and it looks great. But they want to know the ins and outs of what they're getting into, and maybe why the person or the company are hiring. Because typically, when someone's looking for an exec leader, there's usually a problem, or someone's left, or there might be a brand new initiative happening, which is great, but typically they're always coming into maybe a potential mess that they have to work on first before they even look at all the fancy things that the job spec is telling them they're going to do in the next 12 to 18 months.
I think also if you're going to know if it's a new venture, like you're going to see where the company is age-wise, team-wise, just by looking at some data on LinkedIn, for example. But you're absolutely right. At least the ones that we've been part of, someone's left, someone's leaving, there's a mess. The investors have kind of had a reshuffle, whatever. You're not going into the benefits and the perks and the responsibilities of what the job spec's saying. You're going into something that's different. And as you say, people want to know what that different is. I'm curious, I want to break down as much detail as possible to kind of really have people come away from this with as many takeaways that they can try and implement should they be getting these types of roles come to them. So
Mhm.
I want to break down the search process, right? And identify within that process how you might go out and kind of start and kind of begin that journey. So I noted down a few things. Let's start with speaking to who's actually hiring this person. So, could it be the CEO? Could it be the CTO? Or whoever's going to be that manager? Taking that initial qualification, what's the key elements we should be kind of asking, and what should we be learning as the talent team?
Yeah, I think this call actually is probably the most important thing you can do in any process, but in particular in exec searching. Like I said, the job spec only paints a real small picture of why someone might join. I think you would like more than one touch point as well. Understanding perspectives, not just from the hiring manager of what the role looks like and what the challenges are, I think is key. And why I say that is that sometimes when they're hiring a exec leader, the hiring manager might not always be telling you the full story. So actually having a few touch points across a company that you can indirectly then sell to the candidate and the honest facts of what's going on, I think is a no-brainer. So back to the actual first initial call, I think break it down step by step. What's the benefits? What's the positives? Let's get into the challenges. Let's maybe lay the cards on the table. Why are we hiring this person? Where's it going? What's the vision? I think, the most important thing for anyone who's potentially non-active or active is they want to see progression in the role. Where does it lead to? Is it taking over the position of the hiring manager? If so, how does that work? These finer details, will only help you sell the role to this potential person that you're looking for.
Do you think anything's off limits? And let me give an example before you answer that, right? So let's say you're the CEO of a company of 200, 300, Series A funded, right? Your CTO's leaving. I'm in your talent team. I'm coming to you as your recruiter to qualify the role with you. You've been there for a couple of years, right? Your expectations of me is that you know the company, you know the vision, but would you start from scratch as if you didn't know, or would you kind of utilize the information you've already got, or would you just, would you kind of ask only the questions you feel you need to know to get the job search going?
Good question. I personally use both. Obviously, if you've worked at the business and you're clearly still working at that business, there's a reason why. I think that opportunity for you to sell why you're working at that company to the new employer or new exec leader is no brainer. Is probably the most important things, because people tend to buy people and personalities, and I think if you can give them an honest, why you still work at that business, whatever level you're at, people generally look at that and respect that. Back to whoever's hiring, is it the CEO and whatever, I'd go through as much as you can with an honest, open book. Not always a CEO wants to tell someone from your talent team the full story, unfortunately, and that's from a agency side and internal and external side. So that's why when I'm talking about having a few touch points, if for example you are replacing a CTO, well, let's speak to the CTO that was in the position. He knows the role inside out. What was good, what was bad, what do they need to improve on, what to look out for. I think so that as many touch points as you can will save you a lot of time and actually make you feel a lot more equipped that when you're speaking to a new CTO, that you have all the information that someone at that level will need.
So go into as much granular detail, even if it's an uncomfortable question around why that person is departing, but even if you don't get the answer, at least you've gone out and asked the question. You get that sense from whoever you're speaking to.
Exec leaders appreciate honesty more than anything else.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, not everyone is going to love the honesty, because the honesty sometimes is not what they want to hear. but people don't always want to hear what they want to hear. People actually want to hear what they're getting into, and actually, if it works out, great. If it doesn't, it wasn't for them anyway. And you keep your company's reputation intact instead of trying to sell a dream that might not be actually as dreamy as it looks.
So we've got the qualification, we've got detail, we've had an open, honest chat with the hiring manager about why we're looking to bring this person on, and I feel equipped now to go out and start my search. But do I go out and start my search just as is? I go and identify the talent pool today, or do we sit back and review our process before we go and kind of identify? What's the next step for me?
Process. And what I mean by that is make sure your interview process is exactly what you're selling to the leader or to the candidate or to the profile. Do not move the goalposts. Do not change the process. Do not add in more interviews. Not because it makes the process longer and, it actually, in my opinion, starts to show uncertainty, starts to show that you're not sure what you're looking for. And all of a sudden, especially very analytical leaders, start to think that you don't know what you're looking for and you don't feel there's trust there with what they've said. And, at that point, you'll start to lose very, very strong profiles. So clear, precise processes. It doesn't have to be too short. I've run processes, unfortunately, with 6 to 8 interviews, which is crazy, but it does happen. But they were precise. They were, short, sharp interactions, and they was all presented not as interviews, but as discussions with several touch points across the entire company, which gives them an opportunity to sell the entire business in from different perspectives.
I know you kind of beat me to it. I was going to bring up that point. So I know you're a fan of removing interview from the vocabulary and having professional discussions instead. And I don't think necessarily, especially for a senior kind of exec role, and again, maybe an unpopular opinion with some recruitment companies, I actually don't think 6 to 8 stages is that bad, if I'm honest. Yes, it can prolong it if it's 6 to 8 over the course of 6 to 8 weeks. But if they're half-hour conversations, you have 2 or 3 back to back, and as you say, it's presented up front that this is what's going to happen and this is the reason why you're speaking to this many people. I've never had, and I mean, I've hired a few. I know you've done a lot more than me, but I've never had any issues really when it comes to that. As long as I'm up front and goalposts just don't change, as you say.
It depends if they're interviews or they're discussions, I think.
Exactly.
No one at that level is going to say no to speaking to another peer or someone part of their department, just get another perspective. But they are going to say no to another interrogation type interview or trying to catch them out and on whatever.
Especially if you haven't told them, they keep going, oh, can you speak to this person? Oh, can you speak to this person?
Yeah. So it's all to do with, as mentioned, if you create a process, you stick with it. If you are adding in discussions, they're only for the benefit of the profile or the candidate. Not for your benefit to just in case they might not be right, let's add something in. Well, you should make your decision based on your process you already created. I think that's probably the most important thing is it should be all about trying to sell and try and convince this profile candidate that they should be joining your business rather than staying where they are or going to another company rather than you just interviewing them.
So be very clear on the process. Make sure we're having intentional discussions. We're upfront. We're honest from the get-go. Before we even go out and look for anybody, and before we even have any conversations, before we make any advertisements, we know what we're looking for deep down, and we have a process that correlates with how we can work as an organization. Just curiosity, out of the examples that the people you've hired and the processes you ran, has there been kind of an optimal length and optimal time frame that you've kind of seen, or amount of steps that you've seen actually work?
There isn't one size fits all. I've seen anything from 8-week process to 6 months. 6 months is outrageous, but it happens, and it was at a C-level position for a large business, so there was a lot of touch points and a lot of people to essentially to speak to. I don't think it's about time frames. I think it's more about being quite precise and to the point, and not messing anyone about, and just keeping the level of interest going and the momentum going in any process. I think that goes back to an IC position anyway, but actually you're speaking to very, very busy people. They're not here, they don't have time to be waiting and changing their whole agenda calendars for interviews. So I think once it's scheduled, I think being upfront, and actually one thing I always advise is actually preempting additional steps before you've even had the first step. And why I do that is that you can potentially plan not only in your diary but in their diary as well, because they're booking meetings in all day every day. So if you have something provisionally booked in from both sides and just say like it's only provisionally, if it works, great. If we want to move forward both sides, then we take the slot. If not, we stop at that point. But I think timing isn't an issue unless you're up against multiple others, which happens as well. I think that comes into making sure that you're debriefing each step of the way. You're the eyes and ears of the hiring managers, and understanding where they're at with other processes and timeframes is key, because you might want to work in a certain time frame, but they might not want to, and you have to also remember it takes two to tango. So you need to be on the same time frame as them, otherwise you're always going to lose.
I like that point about those debrief sections as well, because I find, they're important for every role. Don't get me wrong, and internal teams do them and they should be doing them. But I also find that sometimes people are a bit scared to say what's really been said in that debrief for fear of it looking bad on them, and they just keep going through the process knowing that it's not really going to work. For example, you've said something to me and I'm thinking you want X, Y, and Z in the future. I know we cannot offer you that. And instead of just stopping the process there and then, they let it continue and let it just fester until someone more senior makes that decision for them, instead of just saying, look, no, we need to stop, find somebody else.
Honesty is the best policy, in my opinion. Whether it, like I said earlier, it might not be what they want to hear, or you might not want to hear it either. But if you understand what the issue is, or the problem is, or what the niggle is, at least you can address it. And I've multiple times before that I think it was going to be the end of the process because this giant problem. But actually, if you know what the problem is and you identify it early on and you can talk about it and you get people involved and you can settle, whoever you're working with down and give them the information that they're looking for, actually you can overcome pretty much everything other than they hate your company and they don't want to join, and that's fine. But typically it's not. Typically it's very small details that they just want to know. And I think anyone would be in their position, which is, like any position, I think it's important just to know what you're getting yourself in for, and having all the information offered to you.
But now we move into the next step, which is actually identifying that talent pool, right? So you don't have to give all your tricks away. That won't be too fun. But how are we looking at identifying who is actually relevant for the position? So in your own kind of mind or in your own process, I've given you a requirement. Here you go. How do you go out and start that next step and get people engaged?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I try and give as much as I can away, but for me, it's all about personality and culture fit. 70-30. 30% technical and 70% culture and personality fit. And why I say that is that exec roles, yes, they are technical, but majority of the positions are either negotiating, building relationships, getting people's trust, steering ships, without being a good culture match for that business. No matter how good of a technical leader you are, you're going nowhere. Becoming or bringing in a leader or exec leader into a large business, small business, whatever, is very, very tricky, because processes have already started. Processes have been working for years and years. Teams have been molded together. They might like their old boss. So for me, actually being a pretty good sales person, just a general good person to work with, and actually a good communicator is probably the first part of the makeup that you're looking for. How I identify is that, I start with looking at the type of businesses they work for. Is it going to be a right match? We could go and find, let's say, VP of data, and there'll be thousands of different components. So if someone's working in the banking sector and you're working with a small startup, is it going to be the right match? Potentially, but law of averages, probably not. From both ends, it's a square peg round hole. Sometimes salaries will be off, so I'll start to navigate around what looks right. I'll start firstly with the technical side. Are they technical match? And then I will work backwards. But typically, I try to speak to as many people as possible personally, and then I'll filter down into a very small pool of people, and I have a pretty good indication from the first call, maybe second call, if that's the person that they're looking for. But I tend to try to, filter and as much as I can from that very, very beginning.
That filter process, so we're identifying just in general maybe the technology skills. Is it right, yes or no, which is mostly black and white. You can see if they're technically right, or there's very few gray areas in most cases, right? Then we're looking at the industry. Is that right? So does it correlate?
Potentially, yeah. It's not, obviously it's a little bit different. I've been doing the same thing for 8 years, 9 years. So when I look at a profile, I will know instantly if it's the right person or right background. But generally speaking, I think, identifying are they technically right, at the right level. We can assume a lot from social media pages. So, for me, I try to keep a very blank canvas on titles, and I don't talk about titles ever. And if anyone's ever had a conversation with me, probably the first thing I ever say is that titles are irrelevant. What I mean by that is that titles in one company against another company can mean two different things. So don't always assume that a VP in one and a VP in the other mean the same thing, because they don't. So I try to go in with a blank canvas to majority of the searching based on what I know, and then I'll make very quick judgments after discovery calls of if I think they're right, and I'll explain to each person if I think they're right, and I'll explain to the people that are not right why they're not right based on what I know about the business, which should be
during the call, or do you take the interview or discovery call first? Okay.
No, I will be very honest. I'll give them my observation, actually discuss throughout, and I'll explain why I don't think it's right, or why I think it's right, and we will agree or disagree, and we'll have the conversation about my opinion, and they can convince me that it's wrong, or they will, majority of the time they say, actually, no, you're right, I don't think the role's for me, then these are the reasons why. And we come up at the end of the call with an agreement wherever we're going to move forward the business, or we're not. I think that's probably the most, and I say the same saying quite a lot: square pegs in round holes. It takes both sides of the coin to both want to work for that business. They might look great on paper, and their profile might look great, but are they going to join your business is two different things. I think actually, instead of trying to square peg in a round hole and sending a profile into your hiring manager's inbox, who looks great, but he's 200k over your budget, actually you're making your job even harder long term, because you're showing someone that you can't, it's not in your banding, and then you're trying to then offer other profiles that are maybe not as technical or not as experienced. It's already
Always going to be
making it that
compared at
harder.
that point to the
Yeah.
person who's 200 grand above. The actual identification process for you, it's obviously all linked back to that discovery call. What have you really been said? Then leaning back into, what do you know about the market? But casting quite a wide net, speaking to as many people as possible, and then creating a smaller talent pool to really identify, okay, out of this group, who do I feel is the best person to be represented, or the best group of people to be represented? Is that right?
Yeah, I think with the wide net, I think, we have to make sure that there is a filtering process attached to that, right? When I'm talking about wide net, is never assume that someone's not right based on a title. So instead of, and I'd explain to someone, even in a message or even in the first call, is that, I'm not sure that you're right for the role, or you might not want this position, but let's have a discussion, see where we end up. So, I try not to assume too much based on what I see online, because it doesn't always paint the right picture.
And I think I do put we in this because obviously we work for, we're in the same company together, but we have the beauty of being able to distance ourselves a little bit from the companies we work with. We are Peritus. We will talk to you about the opportunity, but we can represent you elsewhere if we needed to. Obviously, someone who's internal doesn't have that luxury, but there's still an element of nurturing that needs to happen, from what I'm guessing and gaining from what you're saying. So it's not just clear cut, Mark, you are right for this job, or Mark, you are not right from this job. Thanks for applying. See you later.
No. Candidate experience. Whatever happens, that leader must come away from your business thinking, that was a good process. Like the people love to work there. Now, if they're not, there is a big
Before
problem.
you say that, why? Why do they need to come away with that?
A few reasons, and this could happen at any level, right? Your reputation's more important than pretty much any hire that you ever make. What's to say in a year's time there's not another position coming up and they want to go for it? They speak to a lot of people in the market. For me, that's more important than finding the right person at that time, is that keeping your candidate experience intact, keeping your branding intact, and just offering a quite transparent process for everyone.
So just to identify, or just sorry to recap, transparency from the hiring team to identify exactly what they need and being honest to you as a TA member. You being also front, I guess, back to them to say, look, I need this information so I can represent us better. Then we need to identify a very clear, a very concise interview process that everybody agrees. From there, you obviously identify the talent pools based on your criteria that you've learned from part one. And then obviously regarding of the outcome of those talent pool building, we nurture or we progress, and we nurture for the fact of in the future that individual might share us opportunities themselves. They might return to the company, but in general, it's about creating or maintaining, that brand that you're creating as a business.
First impressions are key to anyone, and it lasts a lifetime. So, sticking to a good process and sticking to a candidate, making sure the candidate experience is what it should be. I think is a no-brainer at any level, really.
Nice. I want to finish off on one thing that you mentioned before we clicked record, and you used the phrase "hiring at all costs." I think you mentioned it briefly at the beginning as well. We didn't kind of explain it too much, but can you just explain to me what that means, and again why it's important for TA teams to know this?
Yeah, I have a bit of an ethos, if you like, on hiring exec level positions, and it's hiring at all costs. And what I mean by that is that typically you don't ever get a second chance of finding that perfect person that you found. So when we do find someone, we have to hire at all costs. Not to say that we change our whole plan of action, we change salary bands, but actually, if we have someone that we want, we need to think about why and how we're going to get them to join, and make sure they have everything they need to make the decision. Very rarely, in my opinion, should you be getting at the end of the process and the candidate rejects your profile, rejects your offer. And why I say that is that you should have been aware after 6 stages or whatever, how many stages, and all the information that you've been given, you should know at that point, especially at that level, whether your profile or candidate is going to take your position. Because they're quite transparent, very honest, and quite direct themselves. They're leaders and they know how to communicate. And I think, so hiring at all costs, I, typically try to identify that if you do fail, and starting a whole process again at that level is very time consuming and sometimes takes a lot of time and effort for everyone involved, and you might not find that person again.
Yeah. Nice. Well, look, I really appreciate you taking the time, Mark. And thank you for sharing your insights. And hopefully there's some things that obviously people can take away from this. There's definitely things that I know I've implemented from what you do specifically around exec searching. Like I said, the biggest element really and what runs through. It should run through all processes, don't get me wrong, but it's really, really paramount in this type of search. It's just clear-cut transparency from every party. And especially if a company's engaging an external team like us, we need to be embedded into that role as if we're part of the company with you. Otherwise, there's no point. And if obviously you're doing it as an internal team, absolutely fine, but you need to have the same transparency towards the C-suite, and they need to treat you almost as if you're an extension to their board, like kind of their C-suite for that period of time. They need to have access to you, to feedback, unedited, unfiltered, so everyone can manage expectations and maintain kind of the process.
Yeah, information is key. Without the information and the honest information, you'll get quite far in the process. You get a load of interviews, you get people interested in your company, but will you find the person and will you hire the person? Two different things. It doesn't matter how many interviews and your funnel looks great, but trust me, without the information, the final details, and all the information that candidate needs, very rarely that is successful at the end.
And we'll end it on that. Thank you so much. Appreciate you jumping on.
See you tomorrow.